Is Dubliners even good? Like, I don't know. Is it good, or is it just that you feel like you need to read it because it's got a lot of hype? Who are these people? Because it's not that good.
Fight.
Like, the only interesting thing about it is that it's the first step in a journey that eventually gets to a pretty good place. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the book Dubliners, and we'll put a typical paperback up against a copy from the Folio Society. Hey! James Joyce's Dubliners was first published in 1914, about 10 years after he originally wrote it. There's been a lot of interest in Joyce as of late because we're at the 100-year anniversary of the release of his masterpiece, Ulysses. In 1922, the simultaneous publication of Ulysses, along with T.S. Eliot's poem The Wasteland, kind of cemented literary modernism as a thing. And so a lot of folks are interested in it and want to jump in and see what all the hype is about. I'd advise some caution there and instead suggest that you start with some of the earlier Joyce works. So you could start with Dubliners, and then you could move on to Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. Ulysses has characters from each one of these in it, but the real reason that one would want to ease into Ulysses is because of the stylistic complexity. It's a tricky book to read. If reading is a video game, then Ulysses is like one of the final bosses. If you even wanted an additional challenge, you could attempt to read Joyce's fourth major release, Finnegan's Wake. That's his last novel, and it's extremely complex and experimental and difficult to read, allegedly. I've never actually gone that far into the game, but that's because I'm scared. I'm scared of Finnegan's Wake. I might honestly never read it. Maybe someday I'll grow up and give it a go, but I doubt it. That's like a totally different game. It's scary. Dubliners, on the other hand, isn't so scary. It's not actually a novel. It's a collection of 15 short stories. The thing is, are they good? Tough call. Are they good? Some of them are all right. A small handful of them are all right. But some of them are just kind of meh. A lot of the stories don't really go anywhere. They kind of fall flat a little bit. At least the worst ones do. Others are just kind of stuck. Stuck is a good word because a lot of the characters in Joyce's book are stuck. They're paralyzed. And so they don't really have very many options or very much agency in terms of how they're going to escape. And that might be one of the problems with Dubliners. There just aren't that many compelling characters with compelling narrative arcs. That's because the main character in Dubliners is probably, as the title suggests, the city itself. The short stories in Dubliners often deal with characters that are lost, and many of them would probably benefit from a way better understanding than I have of Irish nationalism and politics. But there's still enough interesting things going on here to make it a worthwhile read. There are hints of where Joyce is going to go narratively and stylistically in the future, and that alone makes Dubliners worth picking up, reading, and adding to your bookshelf. I first encountered a few of these stories in anthologies as a high school student. Later I picked up a full collection, and now have 2 paperback copies. The first is this vintage international version from Random House. It's from 1993 and features this pretty cool cover of citizens in silhouette walking the city streets. The next is this Premiere Classics edition from 2008, and it has a photograph of the city on the cover. In terms of additional content, this one has the suppressed preface, A Curious History, and the early alternate versions of 3 of the stories, plus a chronology of Joyce's life. The vintage edition has this same bonus material in addition to a very informative 40-page afterword by John S. Kelly, which provides helpful analysis on each of the 15 short stories. Even though I'm not the biggest Dubliners enthusiast, with a few cheap $10 copies kicking around, when I could pick up the Folio Society version at a good price, I figured I'd upgrade. So let's do this. And here we have Dubliners from the Folio Society.
This was originally released in 2003 and is presented in a dark brown slipcase which is illustrated with a wraparound photograph. We're going to see a lot of brown or sepia tones here. The book itself is wrapped in lighter brown cloth, with the title in gold and the author and publisher in a cream color on the front. That same treatment carries over to the spine. The binding is finished with a beige and brown headband, and when we crack the book open, we see sandy, heavy brown end papers. The book is printed on Caxton wove paper. Perhaps it's just my copy, but the paper here is not as ultra white as it seems to be in other folio editions I've examined. Instead, according to color swatches, it trends closer to cream, which I suppose fits the aesthetic of the whole design. If we bring back the vintage edition for a brief side-by-side, we can see that the Folio Society version is bigger. The font size is larger, and the paper provides a better degree of contrast. You may note that on the vintage edition, the text has line numbers, which is great for academic study, but I'm glad Folio's version does not include this feature, as it tends to clutter up the page when reading for pleasure. I wish they hadn't formatted the headers so close to the body of the text, as it often threw me off as I moved on to the second page. While I'm criticizing Folio's layout here, I should mention that I do appreciate the generous outside and bottom margins, but I'd have preferred that they use some of that room to get better spacing out of the gutter, which is a touch too tight in this edition. The Folio edition does not feature any front matter, beyond a brief commentary on the illustrations. It explains that rather than featuring artwork, this edition employs 11 photographs of life in Dublin by Dr. J.J. Clarke, who took them as a student at roughly the same time that young James Joyce started writing the short stories of Dubliners. The photographs are printed on a glossier and slightly thicker stock from the rest of the pages, and have a sepia tone to them. The commentary also indicates that they're meant to be evocative of the city and its people, rather than accurate reflections of the individual stories, but as I read I couldn't help it. My mind sought links between the image and the specific story when they appeared. Let's take a closer look at the photographs now. The frontispiece features an image of a couple, with a crowd and the city of Dublin behind them. The style of clothing is evident, and the slightly out-of-focus photo helps suggest the dreary atmosphere. In the second photograph, an older fellow walks with his pipe on the sidewalk, glancing over at those that pass by, or at the shop windows as he walks along the street. I like to think of this as Father Flynn from the selection The Sisters. In the third photo, we see a younger woman sitting on a rail, looking wistfully over her shoulder. This could be Mangan's sister from the short selection Araby, who our narrator is obsessed with. There's a dreamy, hopeful quality in her posture here. Next up, we have this photograph from a street corner. This could be Corley running his con on the servant girl as his buddy Lenehan looks on. The couple's closed-off posture suggests that this is a serious conversation. In this image, which is one of the only photographs of an interior space, 3 men sit at a table. Is this what breakfast in Mrs. Mooney's boarding house looks like? This image depicts 3 different people: a common man, a police officer, and a young boy. The boy with his head down makes me think of Tom, the young child who's beaten at the end of Counterparts. The lady in the hat and coat could be Mrs. Emily Sinico from the story A Painful Case. The heavy shadow cast by the hat over her face suggests her dark thoughts. Of all the photographs presented in this collection, I think the 7th one appeals to me most in terms of its composition. 2 men stand together, and one holds a flag. This image feels political, and thus it fits well with Ivy Day in the Committee Room, as it's the most overtly political story in Dubliners. Here we have an image of 2 women walking side by side on the street. This seems to suggest Mrs. Kearney and her daughter Kathleen from the short story A Mother. Next up, we have an image of many people dressed well, perhaps having just attended church. That would fit with the religious themes in the short story Grace. The final image is of a well-dressed woman looking at a dog on the streets of Dublin. This could be a memory of one of Gabriel's aunts from The Dead. Every Folio Society edition is unique in that they always offer something different in terms of size or design. The choice to include photographs here is interesting, and it fits the modern realism Joyce's stories are so well known for, but I can't help but think I'd actually enjoy illustrations more. Dubliners offers great potential for representational artwork, and I'd love to see color or stylized renditions of some of the better scenes in the stories. Things need to be livened up a bit, and there are some poignant visual passages that would lend themselves to some great imagery, such as the vision of Gabriel's wife at the top of the stairs from The Dead. Whenever I read a short story collection, I find myself giving each selection a score out of 10 according to how much I enjoyed it. Of course, this is completely subjective, and if I reread Dubliners again next week, or a month or a year from now, I assume the results would be completely different. But I thought I'd present the scores from my most recent rereading of the Folio edition. The individual stories are organized so that the protagonists grow in age as the collection moves forward. The most anthologized selection, at least here in North America, is probably Araby, while The Dead is the most revered story. But I'm rather partial to The Sisters, Two Gallants, and A Little Cloud. Those are the good ones. If I can be so bold as to offer a final piece of advice to any new readers of Dubliners, I'd suggest reading it along with an audio recording. My mental reading voice suffers from my clunky and oafish Canadian accent, and it doesn't do the text any favors. Professional Irish readers do the stories much better justice. The melodic beauty of the Irish accent helps emphasize the lyrical quality of Joyce's prose and enhances the colloquial voice he captures on the page. So while the book itself isn't always great, you can definitely add a little bit of appropriate flavor through proper audio recordings. This edition of Dubliners is alright. In my opinion, Dubliners is a book desperately in need of some dynamic elements, but nothing about this presentation excites me. I happen to have the second printing here, which is fine by me. It is very reasonably priced and easy to find on the secondary market. The design here is bland, but the book is well built and will last a long time. It also has a cohesive aesthetic that holds it all together. So at least I can move these paperback editions to the box of doom, so I can make more room for more new books. As always, thanks for watching, and if you'd like more content, stay tuned to this channel or circle back to previous videos.